So this is an introduction to the parental controls feature, which has landed in various GNOME projects over the last year. I aim to cover it from a user perspective and from a technical perspective, and then I'll look at how you can integrate with parental controls in your app, and I'll finish with some coverage of future plans. And next slide. So I've been working on Endless OS for a few years, and one of the consistent pieces of feedback we got from users and integrators was that they needed support for parental controls, which is the ability to limit what non-admin users can do on some parts of the system, particularly relating to access to and installation of content like websites or new apps. With the growth of FlatHub, a wide variety of apps are now available for users to install, and some of which parents might think are not appropriate for their kids. So we implemented a first version of this, of parental controls, in Endless OS to try things out, and then we started looking at upstreaming it during a Hackfest in London in March 2019, which I wrote up on my blog. That was a productive Hackfest, and there was interest in the feature from a variety of people and a variety of distros, and also interest in the related feature of digital well-being. Digital well-being is applying limitations not to someone else, but to yourself on a computer in order to keep yourself on track by not wasting time or not staying on the computer for too long without a break or working too late and so on. Currently, parental controls support restricting access to specific applications chosen by the administrator, with web browsers having their own special switch. The administrator can choose to prevent the user installing any additional applications, if we can highlight it, or can allow them to only install applications which are suitable for certain age ranges. Restrictions on applications and installation currently only work with Flatpak apps. They can be applied separately to each non-admin user, so there's two tabs at the top there for my friend Bob and my friend Test. And they can only be edited if you have admin privileges. So this screenshot here is the Parental Controls app. It's separate from GNOME Control Center, but linked to from it, because it's likely to support statistics and other non-settings like content in the future. There are various integration points for parental controls. The code for parental controls itself, the settings and the widgets and the library, is implemented in the malcontent project. GNOME Shell uses libmalcontent to prevent disallowed apps from being launched or shown in search results. Flatpak uses it to prevent age-inappropriate apps from being listed or installed and to prevent disallowed apps from being launched. GNOME Software uses it for the same. GNOME Control Center uses it to hide disallowed apps from its app settings panel for the area where you can set where notifications are allowed. And it has a link through to the parental control settings so that you can easily find those to set those up. And GNOME Initial Setup has the most recent integration. It's got some more in-depth integration which allows parent and child users to be created at initial setup time, and then it allows you to set up the initial restrictions on the child account. So here's an example of what we've put into initial setup. The new bit here is this tick box. If you don't tick that box, then initial setup happens as normal as it did before. But if you do, you tick the box and say set up parental controls for this user, then the user that you create here becomes the new child account and it doesn't have administrator privileges. So you tick the box and you continue. You can then set up the parental controls for that new child user using the same set of settings as I showed on the previous screenshot. And then the next step allows you to set a password for a separate parent account, which is created at the end of initial setup as well. So you end up with two users. You end up with a child without administrator privileges and a parent with administrator privileges. And the child can't control it in parental controls because they don't have the admin password. And once you finish setting the parent password, then you proceed as before. So parental controls integration in GNOME Initial Setup was first released in Endless OS 3.8, which was at the start of May 2020. We included some anonymous opt-in statistics reporting to measure the uptake of parental controls. And we've got a bit of a plot of it here. There's not very much data yet because the start of May was not that long ago, and a lot of strange world events have happened in the meantime. But interpreting the graph, you can see it seems consistently that about 2% of new users have been enabling parental controls during initial setup, and the curve is pretty straight. Obviously, that only includes users who've opted into statistics reporting, and it only includes users who've installed Endless OS from scratch since 3.8 was released. Users who were upgrading from a previous release aren't included in these stats because they didn't use initial setup again. So how do parental controls work? This diagram shows an example of how they're implemented in Flatpak to potentially disallow the user from installing an app which is not age appropriate for them. So say the user wants to install Wolfen Doom, which is a violent game. Flatpak passes the ORS, which is the Open Age Rating Service metadata for Wolfen Doom, from its upstream file to libmalcontent, which is the parental controls library. This metadata contains various ratings to describe the app, whether it contains bloody violence, religious references, sexual content, that kind of thing. Each app, and that's not just games, should have this metadata, otherwise it'll have to be assumed to be maximally violent, maximally sexual, full of gambling, and so on, because we wouldn't have the data to say otherwise. Libmalcontent then queries the account service for the user's parental control settings, which indicate what levels of violence and gambling and so on the user is allowed to see. Those are returned. And then it compares those settings against the app source metadata to work out whether installation is allowed. In this case, we decide that the user is not allowed to install Wolfen Doom because it's too violent. Flatpak will then query Polkit to see if the admin wants to override malcontent and allow installation anyway, because the parent may decide that it's okay for their kid to use that app with supervision, or they might decide that they want to bring up their child differently from sort of the generic age restrictions that we have. So it'll pop up a Polkit authorization dialog, and if the user enters the admin password, installation is allowed, and if not, that's denied. Note that this is all implemented within the same user process space, so it's not actually real security. A determined user will always be able to find a way around it, for example, by downloading and running a statically linked version of Wolfen Doom outside of Flatpak, or a myriad of other ways. But this feature should prevent the average child from doing things that they're not supposed to do. While restricting the installation of new apps is implemented using ORS metadata, restricting access to apps which are already installed uses a block list, which is a bit simpler. This allows the administrator to have age-inappropriate apps installed system-wide for all users, but then restrict them on a user-by-user basis. So if there's like 2 parents and an older child account, and then there's a younger child account, then you could have Wolfen Doom installed for the whole family except the young kid to enjoy. Like all data for parental controls, the block list is stored in account service, which has this sidecar database for storing information about user accounts. So how do you integrate your app with parental controls? If you do nothing else, you should please spend 5 minutes doing this, which is to add ORS metadata to your application, and you put it in your upstream file. Even if your application contains no violence, no gambling, no advertisements, no online chat, anything like that, its metadata still needs to say that, otherwise we just can't know. So there's an easy online questionnaire on Richard's GitHub page, which generates the right metadata for you after asking you a series of easy questions, and you then copy and paste that into your app data file. Here is an example of it. Note the attributes are not all about violence, even though that was the example I used before. There's stuff to do with chat, stuff to do with sharing social info, your location, contacts, things to do with gambling and in-game or in-app purchases. And there are a variety of other attributes which are documented on the ORS website. If any ORS data is provided, so if you include this content rating element in your app data, then missing attributes are assumed to have the value none, so like the least intense value. If no ORS data is provided, so if you don't provide the content rating element at all, then they're all assumed to have the intense value. So it's assumed that your app is absolutely full of violence and gambling and chat and everything, because we don't have the info otherwise. If your application has more complex parental controls needs, for example, it might display various kinds of content dynamically. It might be an encyclopedia or something with an embedded web browser, and you feel you need to restrict some of that content for some users but not others, without sort of having it as binary as is this app allowed in its entirety for the user or not, then you might want to use Withnall content within your app to check the parental control settings on a case-by-case basis and internally filter what they're allowed to do. There is some example code in the malcontent repository here, but please get in touch and I can help out, because it's not something that anyone has done yet, but the system is designed for it, so it should be fairly easy to implement. As far as I know, currently, Endless OS is the only distribution with parental controls enabled. Enabling it in your distribution should be a matter of enabling the libmalcontent dependency in the various projects that are listed earlier, and ensuring that all of the apps that you ship have correct ORS metadata. If you allow app installation from sources other than Flatpak, so distribution repositories, that kind of thing, or if you have your own Flatpak repositories which aren't FlatHub, you may need to hook up upstream metadata from your package manager to allow GNOME software to have access to that ORS data, because without it, it can't know and it can't do the filtering. Flatpak uses the same ORS metadata as GNOME software. So that is again something that distributions might need to hook up and add support for. Please get in touch with me if you've got questions about it. But the main idea is that distributions might want to be maybe moving towards using Flatpak for these kinds of apps. So maybe this is a problem that will just go away with time. At the Hackfest in March 2019, various other parts of the feature were discussed, and digital well-being was enthusiastically received by people, so I'd like to work on that next. Screen time, in particular, is a nice and self-contained feature, which it should be relatively easy to implement. The idea is that it limits the amount of time that you can spend on the computer without a break. It gives you a little reminder, a little interruption to say, like, oh, maybe you should take a break now. If anyone's keen to work on it, I'm happy to mentor and provide support if I don't get there and implement it myself first. So we've got some mock-ups here for how screen time functionality could work, which were put together by Alan Day about 8 months ago, I think. And that's the general idea of where we're looking at to go next. So this is a screen time applet in the control center, and you can. The eventual idea is that you get all of this functionality, but we could implement it in stages. So screen time there was give you a little indication of when to break and how long the chunks of time you should be using the computer for are. And then there will be some breakdowns of stats on how long you use the computer each day, maximal time that you're allowed to use the computer for in a single day, that kind of thing. And though the functionality for that could be common between screen time and digital well-being, between parental controls, because there's also this idea that parents might want to limit the amount of time that their children spend on the computer, or again limit it to an hour a day or whatever. So there's a lot of common infrastructure which can be shared between those things. And that's it. Bit of a rapid overview of parental controls and where we're at. So if anyone's got any questions, put them in the Etherpad. Let's see what we've got. So the first question, is the GNOME initial setup part merged upstream? Yes, it is. It got merged a few months ago. It's disabled by default, controlled by configuration option, but yeah, just turn it on, add the malcontent dependency, and it should work. The second question, the parental controlled account should be different from the system account, maybe the parent one. I'm not entirely sure I understand this, but I guess this is something to do with how the accounts differ. So when you're setting parental controls on accounts, you can only set them on non-admin accounts. So the child account, which is the terminology we're using, but I guess you're calling it parentally controlled account. Yes, it does have to be different from the system account because it can't be an administrator. It can't have sudo rights. Because with sudo rights, the child could just enter their own password and turn off their own parental controls. So yeah, when you have parental controls enabled, you always have to have at least two accounts, one parent and one child. Third question, could the screen time functionality integrate or borrow from the existing tool WorkRave? I've never looked at WorkRave, but possibly yes. It depends on how we design the integration into the user's session. I was imagining that it would be something built into the shell, which would maybe dim the screen and pop up a notification. So it's a bit more of a whole desktop experience than just a notification popping up. Something that's a bit like how the nighttime color change is implemented at the moment, where it's not just one bit of the screen changing or notifying you, it's the whole thing. But we can certainly look at that and see if there's code that would be reused or could reuse the entire project. Fourth question. The screen time on iOS shows applications that cannot be launched after a certain time by shading their icon. Can the shell change the appearance of non-launchable apps by using libmalcontent? Yeah, currently, if an app is non-launchable, the shell will just hide its launching icon entirely and pretend like it doesn't exist. We decided that made more sense than shading or hiding them for child users, because that would kind of give the appearance of like the forbidden fruit, that there's this game that looks quite fun and quite interesting because it involves shooting lots of things and you can't launch it, and so it gives you that temptation of like, well, maybe I can just fiddle around to try and launch it, or maybe I can find a different way of launching it, and it seems better to just not have it presented at all. But from a screen time point of view, where you're trying to nudge the user into behaving better or having more sustainable habits, then yeah, we could shade the icons or something, or make them less attractive to run, and libmalcontent should do that. So libmalcontent basically provides you an API saying, is this thing blocked or not, and then the shell would use that to render things differently or hide things as appropriate. Fifth question, I think, is not very serious. I do have a recipe for flapjacks, but I'm not going to share it because it's mine. And the sixth question is still being typed out. Am I familiar with a certain project which does screen time? No, I'm not, but thank you for the link. Again, we'll look at that. That's the answer for that, I guess, is fairly similar to the previous one about WorkRave, where we can take inspiration from all those things, or maybe reuse bits of them, or the whole thing. But the idea would be to come up with a design-driven solution that fits in well with the whole desktop. And if code exists to do that already, then that's great. But maybe some new code will need to be written. And that's it for the questions. Does anybody have any other questions that you want to add? No. Cool. Well, I guess that's that. Thank you very much for your attention. And drop me a line by email or on Rocket Chat if you want to discuss things afterwards. See you.
Thank you. Thank you for this talk.